How did you react when you caught your best friend having an affair? When I was 15, my best friend started dating my adopted sister, Indy. He asked her out in front of my whole family at the dinner table. For 6 months, Maverick was a great boyfriend. Then I started noticing something strange. I came downstairs one night around midnight to grab water. Maverick and my 18-year-old sister, Scarlett, were standing close to each other by the counter, talking quietly. The second I walked in, they jumped apart. Scarlett's face went red. Maverick said he was just leaving and ran out the front door. 2 weeks later, Maverick started coming over way more often. He'd show up for family dinners, even when Indy had to work late. He'd always find a reason to sit next to Scarlett. Meanwhile, Indy would be on his other side, and he barely looked at her. Then I came home early from the gym one afternoon. Maverick's car was in our driveway, but Indy wasn't home. He came out of the hallway looking surprised, said he was just using the bathroom. At our family barbecue, I saw Maverick and Scarlett walk around the side of the house together. 15 minutes went by before they came back. Scarlett's face was red, and Maverick wouldn't look at me. That's when Indy pulled me aside. She said Maverick had been distant, always texting someone. When she asked who, he'd get defensive. Indy found his phone unlocked one night. Hundreds of messages to Scarlett. She confronted him, and he called her insecure. She came to me crying. The texts weren't inappropriate, but they were constant. Good morning. Good night. Asking about her day. Indy confronted Scarlett directly. Scarlett swore nothing was happening. She asked if Indy really thought a college student would be interested in a high school freshman. Then she stormed upstairs. Maverick came to me the next day, acting like the victim. He said Indy was ruining their relationship with her jealousy, asked me to tell her to calm down. I told him he needed to back off from Scarlett, that if I found out he was doing anything with her, he'd answer to the coroner. He got in my face. I'm dating your sister. I'm part of the family now. Then yesterday happened. Maverick and I were in health class, waiting for a police officer to give a talk about gang violence. I saw Maverick 2 rows ahead, staring at his phone with this huge smile. His cheeks were red. He was leaning forward like he was looking at something he really liked. I got up to throw something away and walked past his desk. I thought I'd finally catch him with pictures of Scarlett. What I saw was much worse. Scarlett was 18, but she was also a mother to a 3-year-old daughter. She was raising her in our house because the dad was gone. The pictures on Maverick's phone were of the baby, her in her crib, her being changed when Scarlett thought nobody was looking. I tapped his shoulder. He looked up. Our eyes met. I started swinging. The police officer walked into the classroom right as I tackled Maverick to the ground. 2 teachers pulled me off while I was screaming about what was on his phone. The officer grabbed Maverick's phone before he could delete anything. They evacuated the classroom. Maverick was taken out in handcuffs 20 minutes later. The investigation found over 200 images on his phone and cloud storage. He'd been using his relationship with Indy to get access to our house. The texts to Scarlett weren't about attraction. They were about learning her schedule, knowing when she'd be bathing the baby, when she'd be distracted. He never cared about either of my sisters. He was hunting. Scarlett blamed herself for months. She kept saying she should have noticed, should have been more careful, but predators are good at hiding. That's what makes them dangerous. Maverick is in prison now. The judge gave him 12 years. Indy stopped dating for a long time after that. She said she couldn't trust her own judgment anymore. But last month she told me she's talking to someone new, a guy from her job. She's taking it slow. Scarlett's daughter is 4 now. She doesn't remember any of it. She runs around our backyard chasing the dog, laughing at everything, completely unaware of what almost happened to her. Sometimes I think about that moment in the classroom. What if I hadn't walked past his desk? What if the officer had arrived 5 minutes later? What if Maverick had been more careful with his phone? But I did walk past. The officer did arrive, and Maverick got exactly what he deserved. My sisters are safe. That's all that matters. 3 days after the sentencing, I walked back into school and felt every pair of eyes land on me. Some kids nodded like I'd done something heroic. Others moved to the far side of the hallway and whispered to their friends. I heard the word violent 3 times before first period. I kept my backpack straps tight on my shoulders and stared at the floor tiles. Getting through each day meant ignoring the stares and the whispers and focusing on the next class, the next assignment, the next hour. At lunch, I sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria and ate my sandwich in silence. A group of juniors at the next table kept glancing over. One of them said something and they all laughed. I didn't know if it was about me or not. I didn't want to know. The speaker crackled during fourth period and called me to the counseling office. I grabbed my stuff and walked down the empty hallway. Conrad Briggs was waiting in his office with 2 chairs facing each other and a box of tissues on the small table between them. He was maybe 40, with glasses and a calm voice that never sounded rushed. He asked me to sit down and I dropped into the chair. He wanted to know how I was handling everything. I told him I was fine. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "Fine wasn't really an answer." I shifted in my seat and told him about the nightmares. The ones where I walk down the aisle in health class, but I don't look at Maverick's desk. I throw my trash away and go back to my seat. The officer comes in and gives his talk about gang violence. Maverick leaves with his phone and everything on it. I wake up sweating and check my phone for the time. 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. Sometimes I don't fall back asleep. Conrad wrote something in his notebook and asked if I'd talk to my family about the nightmares. I said no because they had enough to worry about. He said carrying it alone wasn't helping anyone, especially not me. When I got home that afternoon, Indy was already there. She worked at an accounting firm downtown and usually didn't get back until after 6. But she was sitting on the couch with her hands folded in her lap and this energy coming off her that I hadn't seen in months. She asked me to sit down. I dropped my backpack by the stairs and sat in the chair across from her. She told me about Sloan Wagner. He worked in her department and had been friendly since she started. Yesterday, he asked if she wanted to get coffee sometime, not as co-workers, as something more. She said she told him she'd think about it. Now she wanted my opinion. She valued my judgment after everything with Maverick. Her hands were shaking a little when she said his name. I asked what Sloan was like. She said he was funny and respectful. He didn't push when she said she needed time. He just smiled and said to let him know when she was ready. I could see how much she wanted to say yes, and how scared she was to trust someone again. I told her Sloan sounded normal, and she deserved to be happy. She smiled and her eyes got wet. She said she was going to take it slow this time. Coffee in public places for the first few months. No coming to the house. No meeting the family until she was sure. I said that sounded smart. She got up and hugged me hard. When she pulled back, she was actually smiling. Not the fake smile she'd been wearing for months, but a real one. She said she'd text him after dinner. The next morning, Scarlett asked me to drive her to therapy. She'd been having panic attacks behind the wheel and didn't trust herself on the highway. I grabbed the keys, and we got in the car. Ava Solis had an office 20 minutes away in a building with a fountain out front. Scarlett stared out the window the whole drive. Finally, she said she kept thinking about all the times Maverick was alone with Hannah. All the times she left the room, or went to take a shower, or ran to the store. What could have happened in those minutes? What he could have done? Her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands. I reminded her that nothing did happen because we stopped him. We caught him before he could do anything worse. She nodded but didn't look convinced. I pulled into the parking lot and she got out without saying anything else. When we got home an hour later, Hannah was in the backyard with Mom. She saw me through the sliding glass door and ran inside. She wanted me to push her on the swing. She grabbed my hand and pulled me outside. Mom smiled and went back to pulling weeds from the garden. Hannah climbed onto the swing and kicked her legs. I pushed her and she laughed. She told me about the butterfly she saw at preschool. It was yellow and black and landed on her teacher's shoulder. She said it was the prettiest thing she'd ever seen. I pushed her higher and watched her laugh at the sky. She had no idea what almost happened to her. No idea that someone had been watching her and waiting. Her innocence was the only thing that made the nightmares bearable. Dad pulled me aside after dinner that night. We stood in the hallway while everyone else cleaned up in the kitchen. He said he was proud of how I protected my sisters. He said what I did in that classroom took courage. Then he said he knew I was struggling with it, that it was okay to feel complicated about what happened. I didn't have to be fine all the time. His hand landed on my shoulder and squeezed. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. He said we'd get through this as a family. We always did. The next week at the school, a sophomore girl stopped me between classes. I didn't know her name. She had dark hair and was holding her books against her chest. She said her older brother went through something similar a few years ago. Someone at his school got caught with pictures of kids from the neighborhood. She said she wanted to thank me for being brave enough to act. That my story helped her family feel less alone. She walked away before I could respond. I stood there in the hallway while other students moved around me. I realized my story was helping other people. that what happened to us wasn't just about us anymore. Indy went on her first coffee date with Sloan that Saturday. We agreed she'd text me every 30 minutes so I knew she was okay. The first text came at 2:15. She said he was funny and asked about her job without being nosy. The second text came at 2:45. He was respectful and didn't push when she said she wanted to take things slow. The third text came at 3:30. She was heading home and felt good about it. When she walked in the door, her whole face was different, lighter. She sat down and told me everything. How he made her laugh. How he listened when she talked. How he didn't pressure her for a second date, but said he hoped she'd want to see him again. I heard the relief in her voice. She was learning to trust herself again. Conrad called me back to his office the following Tuesday. We sat in the same chairs and he asked about the anger. I told him I still felt it. Every time I thought about Maverick and what he was planning to do to Hannah. What he did to Indy and Scarlett by using them. Conrad said anger was normal and healthy as long as I found good ways to deal with it. He suggested I consider talking to other families who'd been through similar things. That helping them might help me process what I was feeling. I said I'd think about it. He wrote something else in his notebook and told me I was making progress. That I should be proud of how far I'd come. I left his office feeling like maybe he was right. Scarlett drove herself to therapy 3 weeks later and came home looking different. Her shoulders weren't hunched forward anymore, and she walked through the front door without checking behind her first. She sat down at the dinner table and actually smiled when Dad made his usual bad joke about the meatloaf fighting back. Mom looked at her with surprise and relief. Scarlett told us later that Ava spent the whole session helping her understand how predators work, how they study people and learn exactly what to say and do to get what they want, how Maverick planned everything from the start and nothing Scarlett did or didn't do would have changed his intentions. She said Ava kept repeating that manipulation is a skill predators spend years perfecting, and victims can't blame themselves for not seeing through something designed to be invisible. Scarlett said she finally believed it. The guilt was still there, but it didn't control her anymore. She could look at Hannah and feel proud instead of ashamed. The detective called our house 2 days after that. Dad answered, and his face went hard while he listened. He put the phone on speaker so we could all hear. The detective said Maverick tried sending 3 letters to Scarlett from prison. The mailroom caught them during routine screening and added attempted victim contact to his file. They also flagged him for additional monitoring. The detective said predators often try to maintain contact with victims or their families because they see it as continued control. My stomach turned over thinking about Maverick sitting in his cell writing to Scarlett, still thinking about her, still trying to reach our family even from behind bars. Scarlett went pale and left the room. Indy followed her upstairs. I stayed at the table with my hands clenched into fists. The detective said the prison would block any future attempts, and we should report any contact from anyone claiming to represent Maverick. Dad thanked him and hung up. We sat in silence for a long time. Sunday dinner came around 6 weeks after Indy started seeing Sloan. She told us that morning she was bringing him to meet everyone. Mom spent the whole afternoon cooking, and Dad kept checking his watch. Scarlett helped set the table, and I stayed close to the door. When the doorbell rang, I opened it before Indy could reach for the handle. Sloan stood there holding flowers for Mom and a kid's book for Hannah. He was tall with dark hair and nervous eyes. He shook Dad's hand and called him Sir. He complimented Mom's cooking before he even tasted it. He sat next to Indy at the table and didn't crowd her space. Hannah climbed into the chair across from him and stared. Sloan asked her about preschool and what her favorite color was. Hannah said purple and asked if he wanted to play dolls after dinner. Sloan said he'd never played dolls before, but he'd try his best. Hannah decided right then she liked him. We all watched him carefully through the meal, looking for signs, checking his reactions, waiting for something to feel wrong. But he was patient when Indy got quiet. He listened when Scarlett talked about her promotion at work. He laughed at Dad's jokes even though they weren't funny. By the end of dinner, even Dad seemed relaxed. Conrad called me into his office during lunch the next week. He said the local youth advocacy group needed volunteers to speak at schools about recognizing dangerous behavior. He thought I might be interested since I mentioned wanting to help other families. I said I'd think about it, but I already knew my answer. 3 days later, I went to their office after school and met the coordinator. She explained they visit middle schools and high schools to teach students and parents about predatory behavior and the importance of speaking up. She said, My story could help save other kids. I signed up that day. My first school visit happened 2 weeks later. I stood in front of 40 students and told them what happened. How Maverick used his relationship with Indy to get access to our house. How he learned schedules and waited for opportunities. How I almost didn't walk past his desk that day. I told them to trust their instincts and tell adults when something feels wrong. A girl in the back row raised her hand and said her mom's boyfriend made her uncomfortable, but she didn't know if she was overreacting. I told her to tell someone right away. After the presentation, the coordinator said 3 students came forward with concerns. We reported everything to the school counselor. Turning my experience into protection for other kids made everything feel worth it. Scarlett found me in the kitchen a week later while I was making a sandwich. She said she slept through the whole night without waking up once. No nightmares about Maverick or what could have happened to Hannah. Ava taught her grounding techniques for when the guilt tried coming back. She'd focus on 5 things she could see, 4 she could touch, 3 she could hear, 2 she could smell, and 1 she could taste. It pulled her back to the present instead of letting her spiral into what-ifs. She said knowing Hannah was safe and happy made everything else manageable. The therapy was working, and she finally felt like herself again. Not just Maverick's victim or Hannah's worried mother, just Scarlett. She hugged me and went back upstairs. I finished making my sandwich and thought about how much stronger she was than she believed. My English teacher stopped me after class the following Monday. She said the principal wanted to recognize what I did in health class with some kind of award at the end of year assembly. I told her I didn't want any attention or ceremony. I just wanted to finish sophomore year and move on. She asked if I was sure because the school wanted to honor my actions. I said I was positive. What I did wasn't about getting recognition. It was about protecting Hannah and making sure Maverick couldn't hurt anyone. The teacher nodded and said she'd tell the principal. She respected my wishes and didn't bring it up again. I left her classroom feeling relieved that I wouldn't have to stand on stage while everyone stared at me. Indy came to my room 3 months after her first date with Sloan. She sat on my bed and said she was starting to trust her own judgment again. Sloan had been nothing but respectful and honest since they started dating. He never pushed her to move faster than she wanted. He answered questions about his past without getting defensive. He introduced her to his friends and family. She said she was learning that not everyone hides something terrible, that some people really are just good and kind. She looked lighter than I'd seen her in over a year. I told her I was happy for her and meant it. She deserved someone who treated her right after everything Maverick put her through. She said Sloan asked her to be his girlfriend officially, and she said yes. Our whole family welcomed him after that. He started coming to Sunday dinners regularly, and Hannah made him play dolls every single time. Hannah's preschool had family day on a warm Friday afternoon. We all took off work and school to go watch her perform in a little play about a garden. Hannah was dressed as a sunflower with yellow petals around her face. She stood in the front row with the other flowers and waved at us through the entire performance. She forgot most of her lines, but she smiled the whole time. After the play ended, she ran over and grabbed my hand. She wanted to show me her classroom and the art project she made. I followed her down the hallway while she talked about her teachers and friends. Watching her be so carefree and confident reminded me why everything we went through mattered. She had no idea how close she came to being hurt. No idea that someone watched her and planned terrible things. Her innocence was protected, and that was all that counted. The prosecutor called Dad's phone on a Tuesday evening. He put it on speaker so we could all hear. The prosecutor said Maverick's appeal was officially denied, and his sentence was final. 12 years in prison with no possibility of early release. That meant Hannah would be nearly an adult before he got out. Old enough to understand what happened and protect herself. Old enough that Maverick would have no reason to target her anymore. The finality of it brought unexpected relief to everyone. Scarlett let out a breath she'd been holding for months. Indy closed her eyes and nodded. Dad thanked the prosecutor for calling. After he hung up, we sat together in the living room without talking. The legal process was finally over. Maverick was locked away and couldn't hurt anyone. We could move forward without waiting for the next court date or appeal hearing. Conrad called me back to his office the following week. He said I'd made remarkable progress in processing everything that happened. I still had hard days where the anger came back or the nightmares returned, but I learned to recognize my triggers and use healthy ways to cope. The youth advocacy work helped me feel like I was doing something good with what happened. Conrad said I should be proud of how I turned something terrible into motivation to help others. that not everyone could do that. I told him it felt better than sitting around feeling helpless. He wrote something in his notebook and said we'd keep meeting through the end of the school year. Then we'd see if I needed to continue into junior year. I left his office feeling like maybe I really was getting better. The trauma would always be part of my story, but it didn't have to control my future. Scarlett came home from work 3 weeks later with this huge smile I hadn't seen in forever. She grabbed my arm and pulled me into the kitchen where Dad was making dinner. She got promoted to assistant manager at the retail store where she worked. The raise meant she could finally afford to move Hannah into a bigger bedroom and maybe save for a car. Dad hugged her and said he was proud. Scarlett looked at me with tears in her eyes and said she wanted to celebrate by taking Hannah somewhere special. The next Saturday morning, Scarlett loaded Hannah into Dad's car and drove to the zoo an hour away. I stayed home to finish homework, but Scarlett texted me pictures all day. Hannah standing in front of the elephant exhibit with her mouth open. Hannah feeding lettuce to a giraffe. Hannah riding the carousel 3 times in a row. When they got home that evening, Hannah ran through the house telling everyone about the monkeys and the penguins and the big cats. Scarlett pulled me aside while Hannah was showing Dad her stuffed animal zebra from the gift shop. She said something shifted today watching Hannah be so happy and carefree. She said Ava helped her understand that she wasn't defined by what Maverick tried to do, that she could be a good mom and a capable person and someone with a future beyond just surviving. She said she finally felt like herself again, instead of just a victim trying to get through each day. I told her I was proud of her and she hugged me tight. The change in Scarlett was obvious after that. She smiled more. She made plans for the future. She stopped apologizing for things that weren't her fault. Indy brought Sloan to Sunday dinner again 2 weeks later. This time, he didn't look nervous walking through the front door. He shook Dad's hand and asked how his week was. Dad started talking about the basketball game he watched, and Sloan jumped right in with his own opinions about the teams. They argued about defense strategies while Indy set the table. Scarlett came downstairs with Hannah and asked Sloan about his family. He told her about his younger brother who just started college and his parents who owned a bakery across town. Hannah climbed onto his lap during dinner and made him try her mashed potatoes. Sloan pretended they were the best potatoes he ever tasted, and Hannah giggled. I watched Indy throughout the meal. Her shoulders were relaxed. She laughed at Dad's terrible jokes. She touched Sloan's arm when she talked to him. The fear that lived in her eyes for months was fading. She was learning to trust again, and it showed in every small gesture. After dinner, Sloan helped clear the table without being asked. He washed dishes while Indy dried them, and they talked quietly about their plans for next weekend. Dad caught my eye and nodded. Sloan was good for Indy. He was patient and honest, and everything Maverick pretended to be, but never was. When Sloan left that night, Indy walked him to his car. Through the window, I saw them hug for a long time before he drove away. My sophomore year ended 3 weeks later with final exams and last day celebrations. I finished with mostly B's and a couple A's despite everything that happened in the fall. My teachers gave me extensions on assignments when I needed them. My English teacher pulled me aside on the last day and said she was impressed with how I handled such a difficult situation while keeping up with school. She said most students would have fallen apart. I thanked her and left before she could say anything else that might make me cry. Summer break started the next day, and it felt like I could finally breathe. No more walking past the classroom where everything happened. No more whispers in the hallway. No more carefully avoiding certain people who still thought I overreacted. I spent the first week of summer sleeping late and helping Dad fix the fence in the backyard. Hannah followed me around asking questions about every tool I used. Scarlett worked her new schedule at the store. Indy went on dates with Sloan. Everything felt normal in a way it hadn't since Maverick walked into our lives. Conrad called me during the second week of summer to check in. He said he was proud of my progress and wanted to keep meeting once a month through the summer just to make sure I stayed on track. I agreed because talking to him actually helped even when I didn't want to admit it. The youth advocacy group called me in early July. The woman who ran the organization asked if I would speak at a conference in August about protecting children from predators. She said my story could help parents and teachers recognize warning signs before something terrible happened. My stomach dropped at the thought of standing in front of strangers and talking about Maverick. But I also knew that if my experience could protect even one kid, it would be worth it. I told her I would do it. She sent me information about the conference and said I would have 20 minutes to speak. I spent the next 3 weeks writing notes and practicing what I wanted to say. Indy helped me organize my thoughts. Scarlett listened to me practice and told me which parts needed more detail. Dad said he would come to support me, but I asked him to stay home with Hannah instead. I didn't want her anywhere near a conversation about predators, even if she wouldn't understand what we were talking about. Indy and Scarlett both took the day off work to come with me. We drove to the convention center downtown on a hot Saturday morning in August. The parking lot was packed with cars. Inside the building, hundreds of parents and teachers and community leaders filled the conference rooms. I registered at the front desk and got a name tag. My hands were shaking. Scarlett squeezed my shoulder and said I could do this. Indy reminded me that I was helping people. We found seats in the main auditorium and waited for my session to start. My speech went better than I expected. I stood at the podium and told my story from the beginning. How Maverick seemed like a good boyfriend at first. How I noticed small things that didn't add up. How he used his relationship with Indy to get access to our house and Hannah. How I walked past his desk at exactly the right moment and saw what he was really doing. I talked about the warning signs parents should watch for. Adults who want to spend unusual amounts of time alone with children. Adults who give excessive gifts or special attention to one child. Adults who try to create situations where they can be alone with kids. I explained how predators groom entire families, not just their victims. How they build trust and create opportunities over time. How they make everyone feel like they're overreacting if they question anything. My voice shook a few times, but I kept going. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then people started clapping. Several parents came up to me afterward. A mother with tears in her eyes thanked me for sharing something so personal. She said my story made her realize concerning behavior in her daughter's soccer coach. Things she dismissed as friendly attention, but now recognized as grooming tactics. She was going to report him to the league and the police. Another father said he worked with youth programs and wanted to use my story in training sessions for volunteers. A teacher asked if she could share my warning signs list with her school's staff. Each conversation reminded me why I agreed to speak. My experience could actually help protect other children. Knowing I might have saved someone else from what almost happened to Hannah made everything feel worthwhile. Hannah turned 5 in late August. Scarlett planned a birthday party in our backyard with a dozen kids from Hannah's preschool class. She ordered a cake decorated like a butterfly garden because Hannah was obsessed with butterflies lately. Dad hung streamers from the trees and set up tables with juice boxes and snacks. I helped blow up balloons until my face hurt. The kids arrived at noon and immediately started running around the yard screaming and laughing. Hannah wore a sparkly dress and a paper crown. She opened presents in a pile on the grass. Dolls and coloring books and dress-up clothes. One of her friends gave her a toy doctor kit, and Hannah immediately started giving everyone checkups. Scarlett stood by the back door watching Hannah with tears running down her face. I walked over and put my arm around her. She said she never thought they would make it to this moment. That for months after everything with Maverick, she was terrified something would happen to Hannah. That every noise at night made her panic. That she checked on Hannah sleeping 5 times every night just to make sure she was safe. But here they were. Hannah laughing and playing with her friends without any shadows hanging over her, completely unaware of the danger she was once in. Scarlett said Ava helped her understand that Hannah's innocence was protected, and that was all that mattered. That Hannah would grow up happy and safe and never have to carry the weight of what almost happened. We stood there watching Hannah blow out her candles while all her friends sang. Scarlett wiped her eyes and said she was finally at peace. Indy called a family meeting 2 weeks later. We all sat in the living room while Hannah played with her toys upstairs. Indy stood in front of us looking nervous but happy. She said she and Sloan were officially together. That after 6 months of taking things slow and learning to trust again, she was ready to commit to a real relationship. She said Sloan's patience and honesty proved that good people exist. That not everyone was hiding something terrible. That she could trust her own judgment again because Sloan showed her what healthy relationships looked like. Dad stood up and hugged her. Scarlett clapped. I told Indy I was happy for her and meant it. She deserved someone who treated her with respect and kindness after everything Maverick put her through. Indy said Sloan was coming over later for dinner, and she wanted us all to officially welcome him as part of the family. When Sloan arrived that evening, we treated him differently than before. Dad shook his hand and said he was glad to have him around. Scarlett asked him to stay for game night. Hannah dragged him to the living room to build blocks. Sloan fit into our family naturally like he always belonged there. Indy watched all of us interact with him, and her whole face lit up. She found someone good and honest and safe, someone who would never hurt her or use her to get to someone else. I sat on the back porch 3 days later watching the sun set over our yard. Hannah was chasing butterflies with our dog running beside her. She squealed every time she got close to one. Indy and Sloane sat on the grass laughing together about something that happened at work. Scarlett stood by the fence talking with Dad about her promotion and her plans to go back to the school part-time. Everyone I loved was happy and whole. The nightmares that used to wake me up every night were fading. I still had hard days where I thought about what could have happened if I hadn't walked past Maverick's desk. But those moments came less often now. My family was safe. Hannah was protected. Maverick was locked away where he couldn't hurt anyone. We survived something terrible and came out stronger on the other side. I watched Hannah catch a butterfly gently in her hands and show it to the dog before letting it go. She had no idea how close she came to losing everything. No idea that someone watched her and planned horrible things. Her innocence stayed intact, and that was all that mattered. I leaned back in my chair and breathed in the warm evening air. We were going to be okay. All of us. Together.